2017-18 Qatar diplomatic crisis reactions. Global reactions. Israel's defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, described the situation as an opportunity for Israel, stating, "Some Arab countries' interests overlap with Israeli interests, including the issue with Al Jazeera." He went on to describe Al Jazeera as an incitement machine and pure propaganda. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has demanded Al Jazeera shut down its offices in Israel. Reports that Mauritius had cut ties with Qatar were refuted by the Mauritian government. A report in the Saudi Gazette incorrectly stated that Mauritius had broken off ties with Qatar and that Mauritius Vice Prime Minister had issued a communique pledging his country's support for Saudi Arabia. This prompted further erroneous reports by other outlets. However, Mauritian Vice Prime Minister Shoukoutli Sudhan in an interview with Le Défi Media Group of Mauritius refuted claims that he had issued any such communique, and Mauritius Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement that Mauritius continued to maintain diplomatic relations with Qatar. Pakistan stated that it had no plans to cut diplomatic relations with Qatar. Members of the parliament passed a resolution in National Assembly of Pakistan urging all countries to show restraint and resolve their differences through dialogue. Federal Minister for Petroleum and Natural Resources said that Pakistan will continue to import liquefied natural gas, LNG, from Qatar. A six-member Qatari delegation headed by a special envoy of the Qatari Emir visited Pakistan and asked Pakistan to play a positive role in resolving the diplomatic crisis. Prime Minister of Pakistan Nawaz Sharif said Pakistan would do all it can to help resolve the crisis and called on the Muslim world to play a role in ending hostilities. TRT in a report said that Pakistan would deploy 20,000 troops in Qatar, but the Pakistani Foreign Ministry denied the report. The Philippines suspended the deployment of migrant workers to Qatar on June 6, 2017. However, the next day, they allowed the deployment of returning workers and those with an overseas employment certificate, but still maintained the suspension of the deployment of new workers. The suspension was later fully lifted on 15 June. United States President Donald Trump claimed credit for engineering the diplomatic crisis in a series of tweets. On 6 June, Trump began by tweeting, "During my recent trip to the Middle East I stated that there can no longer be funding of radical ideology." Leaders pointed to Qatar, "Look." An hour and a half later, he remarked on Twitter that it was good to see the Saudi Arabia visit with the king and 50 countries already paying off. They said they would take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference, sick, was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end to the horror of terrorism. This was in contrast to attempts by the Pentagon and the Department of State to remain neutral. The Pentagon praised Qatar for hosting the Al Udeid Air Base and for its enduring commitment to regional security. U.S. Ambassador to Qatar, Dana Shell Smith, sent a similar message. Earlier, the U.S. Secretary of State had taken a neutral stance and called for dialogue. On 8 June, President Donald Trump, during a phone call with the Emir of Qatar Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, offered to act as a mediator in the conflict with a White House meeting between the parties if necessary. The offer was declined, and a Qatari official stated, "The Emir has no plans to leave Qatar while the country is under a blockade." On 9 June, Trump once again put the blame on Qatar, calling the blockade hard but necessary while claiming that Qatar had been funding terrorism at a very high level and described the country as having an extremist ideology in terms of funding. This statement was in conflict with Secretary of State Tillerson's comments on the same day, which called on Gulf states to ease the blockade. On June 13, 2017, after meeting with Tillerson in Washington, Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir stated that there was no blockade and what we have done is we have denied them use of our airspace, and this is our sovereign right, and that the King Salman Center for Humanitarian Aid and Relief would send food or medical aid to Qatar if needed. On June 21, 2017, Trump told the crowd in Iowa that we cannot let these incredibly rich nations fund radical Islamic terror or terrorism of any kind, noting that after his visit to Riyadh in May 2017 to meet with Saudi King Salman and urge an end to terror funding, he has taken it to heart. And now they're fighting with other countries that have been funding terrorism. And I think we had a huge impact. On June 8, 2017, Egypt's Deputy UN Ambassador Ihab Mustafa called for the United Nations Security Council to launch an investigation into accusations that Qatar paid up to $1 billion to a terrorist group active in Iraq to free 26 Qatari hostages, including members of its royal family, which payment would violate UN resolutions. The Qataris were kidnapped on December 16, 2015 from a desert camp for falcon hunters in southern Iraq. The hostages were released 18 months later in April 2017. Qatari diplomats responded to the Egyptian calls for an investigation by reaffirming their commitment to the UN resolutions towards eliminating the financing of terrorism. In June 2017, the government of Qatar hired American attorney and politician John Ashcroft to lobby on its behalf and help the state deny international allegations of supporting terror. On November 24, 2017, UAE's head of security, Lieutenant General Dahi Khalfan, blamed the 2017 Sinai attack on Al Jazeera's reporting and called for the bombing of Al Jazeera's headquarters by the Saudi-led coalition.